The corridor was never meant to be quiet. Elias Renn noticed that first. Not the ordinary silence of a decommissioned wing or an off-hour maintenance stretch, but the kind of quiet that felt intentional, curated, as if the space itself was holding its breath. The station's inner ring usually hummed with a constant undercurrent, power cycling through conduits, atmospheric stabilizers whispering behind panels, distant footsteps echoing through composite alloy. Here there was nothing. No vibration under his boots, no background resonance in his implants, just light. Soft, cold illumination arced along the curved walls, tracing a perfect oval corridor that looked more ceremonial than functional. White surfaces layered over subtle metallic seams, pristine to the point of unreality. It reminded Elias of a place designed to be seen, not used, which meant, of course, that his authorization shouldn't have worked. Yet the access panel had accepted his clearance with a single pulse of pale blue, sliding open as if it had been waiting for him specifically. "That's not ominous at all," Elias muttered under his breath. He stepped through anyway. The assignment was simple, at least on paper. Environmental diagnostics, atmospheric fluctuation detected in an inner diplomatic corridor, possible interference with quantum-stabilized lighting arrays. He had been on the station for 8 months now, long enough to know that simple, rarely survived contact with alien architecture. Still, nothing in the work order mentioned this. The corridor curved gently forward, framing a circular chamber ahead. At its center stood a woman. She was facing away from him. For a split second, Elias registered only light, intricate patterns flowing across her skin like living constellations. Luminescent lines traced her neck, her shoulders, the elegant slope of her spine, pulsing softly in hues of silver and ice blue. The markings weren't decorative. They moved with purpose, responding to something internal, as if her body itself were a circuit. Then she turned. Time did something strange. Elias felt it stretch, thin and brittle, each heartbeat landing too loudly in his ears. Her eyes were impossibly clear, a piercing crystalline blue that locked onto his with immediate, unmistakable awareness. Not surprise, not fear. Assessment. She wore no armor, no visible weapons. Only a flowing white garment that seemed grown rather than stitched, draping around her with ceremonial restraint. A delicate crown rested against her pale hair, woven with metallic filigree that mirrored the luminous patterns glowing across her skin. Her ears, long, elegant, unmistakably alien, angled slightly back as she studied him. "You are not scheduled to be here," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, perfectly modulated. Elias swallowed. "I agree, completely." This was not a diplomatic aide, not a noble, not even a high-ranking official. This was Queen Aelyra of the Lythari Continuum, sovereign architect of interstellar accords, living symbol of unity across 12 systems, a figure whose presence alone could destabilize trade routes and ignite wars if misinterpreted. And he had just walked into her private corridor with a diagnostic scanner and grease still on his gloves. "I'm maintenance," Elias said quickly, lifting his hands in a universal gesture of non-threat. "Environmental systems." There was a fluctuation alert. I followed the access route my schematics provided. Her gaze flicked briefly to the scanner at his side, then back to his face. "The schematics are wrong," she said. "Yes," Elias replied without hesitation. "That's becoming a theme." Something in her expression shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if the answer had not been what she expected. "You will close the door," Queen Aelyra said, "from the inside." Every survival instinct Elias possessed screamed in protest. "Your Majesty, with respect, I think leaving immediately." "If you leave," she interrupted gently, "security protocols will engage, questions will be asked, records will be created, and I will be forced to decide how much of what you saw must be removed to protect this space." That word, removed, landed with terrifying clarity. Elias reached behind him and sealed the corridor entrance. The lights shifted, locking into a private spectrum that his scanner couldn't even categorize. They were alone. Only then did he notice the faint irregularity beneath her glow, the way some of the luminous patterns fractured near her collarbone, how the light dimmed momentarily along one side of her neck before stabilizing again. Damage, old, healed, hidden. Her eyes never left his face. "You noticed," she said softly. Elias hesitated. Lying felt dangerous. Telling the truth felt worse. "I noticed that the light compensates," he said carefully, "which usually means something underneath doesn't behave the way it used to." For the first time, the Queen's composure cracked. Not visibly, not dramatically, but the air changed. "Most beings," Aelyra said, "see what I allow them to see." She stepped closer. The light around her intensified, the patterns across her skin responding to proximity, to tension. Elias felt suddenly, acutely aware of his own breathing, his own insignificance in the face of someone built, engineered to embody perfection. "You," she continued, "are standing in a place no one else is permitted to enter. You have seen evidence that contradicts the narrative of my invulnerability." Her voice dropped, losing its ceremonial edge. "And now I must decide what you are to me." Elias met her gaze, heart hammering. "I didn't come here looking for secrets," he said, "and I'm not interested in power. I fix systems that break. That's it." A long silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Aelyra smiled. Not the practiced expression of a ruler, not the polished curve used for assemblies and treaties, something real. "Then," she said, "perhaps you are precisely the wrong person to threaten me." The light dimmed slightly as she stepped back. "Stay," the Queen said, "and listen." Elias Renn realized, in that moment, that opening the wrong door had just altered the trajectory of his life, and possibly the fate of an empire that was far more fragile than it dared to appear. Elias didn't leave the corridor when Queen Aelyra dismissed him, not because she told him to stay, she hadn't, but because the door behind him remained sealed, its pale light unresponsive to his clearance. The station systems, so obedient moments ago, now behaved as if his authority no longer applied. Aelyra noticed. "Relax," she said calmly. "I restricted the corridor myself. This section no longer recognizes external permissions." "That's reassuring," Elias replied, in a deeply alarming way. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. She moved toward the circular chamber's edge, the luminous patterns across her skin dimming as if responding to her will. With each step, the glow softened, retreating inward, becoming less spectacle and more signal. Elias realized then that the light wasn't meant to impress, it was meant to function. "You're trying very hard not to look at me," Aelyra observed. "I'm trying very hard not to die," Elias said honestly. "I was under the impression those goals overlapped." "They do," she replied, "but intention matters." She stopped a few paces away, close enough now that Elias could see the fine geometry etched into her crown, the subtle asymmetry that suggested it had been repaired at least once, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her, an unexpected contrast to the sterile chill of the corridor. "You saw the fracture," she said, "in the light." "Yes, and you inferred damage." "I work with systems," Elias said. "Perfect systems don't need compensation." Aelyra studied him again, more slowly this time, not as a ruler assessing a subject, but as something closer to curiosity. "Most people," she said, "see my radiance and assume divinity, or threat, or desire. They never ask how much energy it costs to maintain." She turned slightly, angling her shoulder away from him. For a brief moment the glow flickered again, revealing the faintest irregularity beneath, subdermal scarring woven into her physiology like an old scar beneath fresh skin. Elias looked away instinctively. "Why show me that?" he asked quietly. "Because you already know it exists," she replied, "and because pretending otherwise would insult your intelligence." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. "You understand what you've stumbled into," Aelyra continued. "Not just personally, politically." "I'm starting to," Elias said, "and I'm increasingly confident my contract didn't include this." Aelyra almost laughed. The Lythari Continuum is governed by perception, she said. Strength is not merely exercised, it is performed. My body, my presence, my light, all of it reinforces the narrative that I am untouchable. She met his eyes again. What you saw contradicts that narrative. Elias exhaled slowly. You survived something. Yes, something serious. Yes, and your people can't know. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They can know I rule. They can know I decide. They can know I endure. But not that you were hurt. Not that I can be, she corrected. Elias frowned. That doesn't make sense. No, Aelyra agreed. It does. She moved again, circling him slowly, the soft glow tracing patterns across the floor. Elias resisted the urge to track her movement too closely, acutely aware of how exposed he felt beneath her attention. In my culture, she said, a ruler who bleeds is a ruler who failed to anticipate, failed to dominate the probability space, failed to remain absolute. That's insane, Elias said before he could stop himself. Aelyra halted. For a breathless moment, Elias was certain he'd crossed an irreversible line. Then, unexpectedly, her shoulders relaxed. You said that in your thoughts, she said softly, before you said it aloud. Occupational hazard, Elias muttered. I fix things that don't make sense. When systems are built on faulty logic, they eventually collapse. Her eyes sharpened. You believe my system is faulty. I believe, Elias said carefully, that surviving an attempt on your life and continuing to rule successfully is evidence of strength, not weakness, and that any civilization that punishes survival is poorly optimized. Aelyra stared at him. Then she laughed. The sound was quiet, unguarded, startlingly human. It echoed faintly through the corridor, dissolving some invisible tension Elias hadn't realized was there. No one, she said, has spoken to me like that since before I ascended. That was not my intention, Elias said. I'm very bad at diplomacy. Good, Aelyra replied. I have an excess of diplomats. She grew serious again, stepping closer until only a narrow space separated them. You are aware, she said, that I could order your memory altered, or your contract terminated, or your presence erased from this station entirely. Yes. And yet, she continued, you stand here telling me my civilization is illogical. Yes, Elias said, because if I don't, then I become part of the system that keeps you alone with this. The light around her flared briefly, then steadied. Something shifted between them, not trust, not yet, recognition. You will keep what you've seen to yourself, Aelyra said. Not because you threaten me, Elias replied, but because using it would make me complicit. Her gaze softened. In return, she said, you will remain accessible. Elias blinked. Accessible how? Not as an advisor, she clarified. Not publicly, not officially. She leaned in just enough that her voice dropped to something private. As someone who knows the truth and does not demand anything in exchange for it. Elias felt a strange tightening in his chest. That's dangerous, he said. Yes, Aelyra agreed, for both of us. She straightened, the luminous patterns brightening once more as the sovereign mask slid back into place. You may leave now, she said. The corridor will release you. The door behind him shimmered open. Elias hesitated. Your Majesty. Yes, for what it's worth, he said. You don't seem broken, you seem tired. For a heartbeat, the Queen didn't respond. Then quietly, that may be the most accurate assessment anyone has made. Elias stepped out into the station's familiar hum, heart still racing. Behind him, the door sealed, and Queen Aelyra stood alone once more, carrying a secret that now belonged to two. Elias learned over the following weeks that secrecy had a rhythm. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't reckless. It was procedural, slotted carefully between scheduled maintenance checks, diplomatic assemblies, and the quiet hours when the station's inner corridors were least observed. The first time Aelyra summoned him again, it wasn't to the luminous corridor. It was to a maintenance alcove behind the atmospheric exchangers of the Western Ring, an unremarkable space filled with humming panels and faint thermal drift. a place so aggressively ordinary that no one would question why a technician might be there for an extended period. She arrived without ceremony. No crown, no flowing radiance. The luminous patterns across her skin were dimmed almost entirely, visible only as faint tracery beneath the surface, like constellations seen through fog. She wore a simple, high-collared garment designed for anonymity rather than authority. "You chose well," she said quietly, surveying the alcove. "No surveillance nodes, no active observers." "I fix what breaks," Elias replied. "I also notice what listens." That earned him a brief, genuine smile. They didn't speak for several seconds after that. It struck Elias how different she felt here, less overwhelming, less symbolic. Still powerful, unmistakably alien, but no longer radiating the crushing presence of a sovereign performing invulnerability. Just a woman standing in a narrow maintenance space, shoulders slightly tense, hands folded as if she wasn't entirely sure what to do with them when no one was watching. "You've been busy," Elias said finally, gesturing to the diagnostic display he was pretending to recalibrate. "I always am," Aelyra replied. "But lately the pace has changed." "How so?" She hesitated. A pause Elias was beginning to recognize, the moment where calculation wrestled with honesty. "There has been increased scrutiny," she said. "Not officially, not yet, but patterns shift when suspicion grows." "Suspicion of what?" "Of inconsistency," Aelyra said. "Of softness, of variance." Elias frowned. "You've been ruling the same way you always have." "Yes," she agreed, "which is precisely the problem." She moved closer to one of the panels, resting her fingertips lightly against its surface. The faint hum of the system responded, stabilizing almost instinctively. "My people are accustomed to rigidity," she continued. "Absolute positions, unchanging certainty. Any deviation, any willingness to compromise or adapt, is now being interpreted as erosion." "Because they're looking for cracks," Elias said. "Yes. And they'll find them," he added quietly. "Not because you're weak, but because no system survives constant pressure without flex." Her gaze snapped to him. "You believe that?" "I believe systems fail when they pretend they're perfect," Elias said. "People too." Something in her expression softened. "You speak as if you've lived inside such a system," she said. "I have," Elias replied. "Just not on a galactic scale." Silence fell again, but this time it felt comfortable. They fell into a pattern after that. Aelyra would arrive under the guise of inspections or infrastructure curiosity. Elias would ensure the chosen space was clean of surveillance and plausible enough to justify extended maintenance presence. They talked about governance, about perception, about the exhausting effort of embodying certainty when doubt was the only honest response. She never spoke of the attempt on her life directly, but sometimes, when the light dimmed unexpectedly along her neck or shoulder, Elias would notice the slight tightening of her jaw, the way she shifted her posture to compensate. And sometimes, rarely, she would notice him noticing. "You don't have to look away," she said once. "I don't want to stare," Elias replied. "I'm not asking you to," she said. "I'm asking you not to pretend you don't see." That moment lingered longer than it should have. The proximity, the awareness, nothing happened, which somehow made it worse. The first sign of real danger came quietly. Elias noticed it while reviewing routine access logs, an anomaly buried beneath layers of normality. A pattern of corridor monitoring that didn't align with standard security sweeps. Too consistent, too intentional. Someone was mapping movement, not station-wide, specifically around the maintenance sectors Aelyra favored. He brought it up during their next meeting, voice low as he adjusted a panel that didn't actually need adjusting. "Your security teams," he said carefully, "have they been recalibrating surveillance priorities?" Aelyra stiffened. "No," she said. "Why?" "Because someone else has." She turned fully toward him then, the faint luminescent patterns along her collarbone brightening in response to heightened emotion. "How certain are you?" "Certain enough to be worried," Elias replied. "It's subtle, Whoever's doing it knows the system. They're not watching you. Then what are they watching? Deviation, Elias said. Unscheduled overlaps. Places where patterns don't match expectations. Her eyes narrowed. They're looking for what doesn't fit. Yes, and you, she said slowly, do not fit. The weight of that settled between them. You should distance yourself, Elias said reluctantly. At least publicly, change your routes, reduce frequency. Aelyra studied him with an intensity that made his breath hitch. You're afraid, she observed. For you, Elias said. For yourself, she corrected gently. He didn't deny it. There are risks, she said. I knew that when I asked you to stay. I know, Elias replied. But knowing and experiencing are different. She stepped closer, close enough now that he could feel the faint warmth again, the soft energy of her presence pressing against his senses. If I withdraw, she said, they will assume guilt. And if you don't, Elias said, they'll eventually connect the dots. Aelyra exhaled slowly. Then we adapt, she said, quietly, carefully. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. You are not just a witness anymore, she added. You are a variable. Elias felt the truth of that settle into his bones. And for the first time since opening the wrong door, he wondered, not if this would end badly, but how much it would cost before it did. The summons did not come through official channels. That alone told Aelyra something had shifted. No ceremonial aid, no formal announcement, no carefully scripted request framed as protocol. Instead, a single encrypted pulse arrived through her private interface, brief, precise, unmistakably intentional. Emergency council session. Immediate attendance requested, not demanded, requested. That word was wrong. Aelyra stood alone in her private chamber as the message faded, the luminous tracery along her skin flaring brighter than she intended. The system reacted instantly, stabilizing the glow, smoothing the visual output back into flawless radiance. But the surge had already happened. Someone would have noticed. She closed her eyes, breathing carefully, counting the rhythm she had learned 3 years ago. After pain, after recovery, after learning how much control it took to appear effortless. By the time she stepped into the transport corridor, the sovereign mask was back in place. Perfect. Elias found out 15 minutes later, not from an alert, but from absence. Aelyra missed their scheduled overlap window. That alone wouldn't have concerned him. Her world operated on variables he didn't always see. But when he checked the access logs, quietly, carefully, he saw the spike. Multiple council members rerouted to the high chamber. Security permissions tightening. Surveillance density increasing around the inner ring. Someone had stopped watching patterns. They were watching people now. Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest. This wasn't subtle pressure anymore. This was a test. The council chamber was designed to amplify authority. Circular tiers rose around a central platform, each level representing a concentration of political weight. The architecture forced anyone standing at the center to be seen from every angle, nothing hidden, nothing obscured. Aelyra stood there alone. Councillor Vyarth spoke first. "We appreciate your prompt attendance, your radiance," he said smoothly. "Recent observations have raised questions we believe merit clarification." Questions, another word that didn't belong. Aelyra inclined her head fractionally, then asked them. Vyarth's gaze flicked briefly to the others before returning to her. "There have been reports of unscheduled movements within restricted maintenance sectors, areas traditionally beneath your direct attention." Aelyra felt it then, a subtle tightening beneath her collarbone, a flicker of heat along the damaged pathways. She compensated instantly. "My curiosity has not changed," she replied, "only the range of my concerns." "Curiosity," Councillor Sayles echoed, "or inconsistency." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Aelyra kept her posture flawless, but something inside her shifted. They weren't accusing her. Not yet. They were circling. "You have ruled with admirable precision," Sayles continued, "which is why recent deviations have drawn notice. You linger, you consult, you adapt." Aelyra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And this troubles you?" she asked. "Adaptation," Vyeth said carefully, "can be interpreted as uncertainty." There it was, the blade finally unsheathed. Aelyra met his gaze steadily. "Adaptation is how systems survive." "Or how they fracture," he countered. For the first time, Aelyra felt the urge to look away. She didn't, but the effort cost her more than she expected. Elias watched the council feed from a maintenance terminal he absolutely did not have authorization to access. He saw it immediately, the subtle shift in Aelyra's posture, the way her glow stabilized a fraction too slowly after Sayles spoke, the way the council leaned in, predatory, sensing something beneath the surface. They were close, too close. His fingers flew across the interface, rerouting environmental output to introduce a controlled atmospheric fluctuation, barely perceptible, but enough to justify Aelyra stepping back if she needed to. It was a gamble, but doing nothing felt worse. The heat spiked unexpectedly. Aelyra felt it, a sudden pressure change, slight but sharp. The light along her skin flared in response before she could suppress it. The chamber reacted, a collective intake of breath. Not fear, recognition. Aelyra stepped back instinctively. For half a second, just half, she lost perfect control. And in that instant she felt it, the scar, not pain, memory. The echo of a blade that should have ended her reign and nearly ended her life. She recovered quickly, too quickly. Vyeth smiled. "There," he said softly, "that." The chamber fell silent. Aelyra realized then that the test had already concluded, and she had not passed it perfectly. After the session, after the measured deflections and carefully neutralized statements, Aelyra did not return to her private quarters. She diverted, straight to the maintenance sector, straight to Elias. He was already there, pretending to recalibrate a stabilizer that did not require recalibration. "You shouldn't be here," he said immediately. "I know," she replied. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Elias noticed. He stepped closer without thinking, lowering his voice. "They pushed harder than expected. They sensed something," she said quietly. "Not the truth, but the possibility of it." "And you felt it," Elias said. She nodded once. "I lost control," she admitted. The words were barely audible. Elias felt something break open inside him, not fear, not desire, but something deeper, protective, grounded. "You didn't," he said firmly. "You adapted." Her eyes lifted to his, raw and unguarded for the first time. "I'm tired," she said. The admission landed heavier than any confession of injury. Elias didn't reach for her. He didn't touch. But he stood there, solid and present, and said the one thing no one else ever had. Then stopped carrying it alone. The luminous patterns along her skin dimmed, not by force, not by control, but by choice. And in that moment, Queen Aelyra stopped being invulnerable. Not to the galaxy, just to him. The fracture became visible the moment Aelyra stopped pretending it didn't exist. She didn't announce it, didn't dramatize the shift. But the continuum was exquisitely sensitive to change, and even the smallest deviation in a sovereign's rhythm sent ripples through systems designed to detect instability. Within hours of the council session, security protocols tightened. Not uniformly, selectively. Elias noticed it first in the maintenance grid, access permissions that lagged just long enough to be inconvenient diagnostic requests rerouted through unnecessary approval layers. Corridors he had moved through freely now flagged for secondary verification. It wasn't an arrest. It was containment. Someone was narrowing the perimeter. He didn't tell Aelyra immediately, not because he didn't trust her, but because he needed to be certain before adding another weight to shoulders already bowed beneath expectation. Certainty came faster than he'd hoped. The alert arrived during a routine system sweep, an internal authorization override tagged to Counselor Vyeth's signature, granting temporary access to restricted biometric analysis archives. Not public, not sanctioned, targeted. Elias stared at the data stream, pulse quickening. They weren't investigating policy. They were looking for proof. Aelyra arrived late that cycle, slipping into the maintenance chamber with a quiet urgency that set Elias on edge. The luminous patterns beneath her skin were dim, uneven, held in check by effort rather than ease. "You felt it too," she said before he could speak. "Yes," Elias replied. "They've moved from observation to extraction." Her jaw tightened. "Vyarth." "Vyarth," Elias confirmed. "He's authorized biometric deep dives. That means he suspects physiological inconsistency. And once they suspect," Aelyra said softly, "they will not stop until they can classify it." Silence fell, dense with implication. Elias made a decision. He didn't announce it either. He simply reached into the maintenance interface and rerouted the archive access through a diagnostic redundancy loop, one of the oldest tricks in the station's infrastructure, the kind that relied on outdated assumptions no one had bothered to update. "What are you doing?" Aelyra asked. "Breaking the rules," Elias said, quietly. Her eyes widened. "You can't." "I can," he interrupted gently. "And I already am." He worked fast, fingers moving with practiced precision. Layers of data blurred and reshaped, masking what Vyarth was searching for behind innocuous system noise. "It won't hold forever," Elias said, "but it buys time." Aelyra stared at him. "You are risking yourself," she said. "Yes." "For me." "Yes." The admission hung between them, uncomplicated and absolute. "No one has ever done that without demanding something in return," she said. Elias didn't look up. "Then this will be a first." The system chimed softly, override complete. Elias exhaled. For the first time since she had known him, Aelyra stepped forward without calculation. She stopped just short of touching him. Her presence was different now, less controlled, more felt. The faint warmth of her skin brushed the edge of his awareness, the dim glow responding instinctively to proximity. "You should distance yourself from me," she said, even as her body did the opposite. "If this is discovered." "I know," Elias replied, "but you don't get to decide that alone anymore." Her breath caught. That more than the risk, more than the defiance, shook her. "Do you understand what they'll do if they find out?" she asked. "Yes," Elias said. "They'll accuse you of deception. They'll accuse me of manipulation. They'll frame this as weakness instead of survival. And you're still here." "I'm still here." Aelyra closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them again, something fundamental had shifted. "You are no longer just a variable," she said quietly. "You are an anchor." Elias finally turned to face her fully. "Then let me be one." The luminous patterns along her neck flickered, then steadied, not forced into place but aligning naturally, as if responding to internal balance rather than suppression. She reached out, stopped herself, then slowly, deliberately rested her fingers against the sleeve of his uniform. The contact was light, but it carried weight, not desire, not possession, trust. "If this collapses," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "it will not just cost me my reign." "I know," Elias replied, "and you stay." "Yes." Her hand tightened fractionally. For the first time since her ascension, Queen Aelyra allowed herself to lean, just a little, into someone else's presence. And somewhere deep within the Continuum's immaculate systems, a fault line widened, not from weakness, but from choice. The strike came sooner than Elias expected. It didn't arrive with alarms or public accusations. There were no armed guards at his door, no dramatic interruption of council proceedings. Instead, the station system simply changed. Lights dimmed a fraction too long between cycles. Environmental stabilizers lagged by milliseconds that only someone like Elias would notice. Diagnostic requests he submitted vanished into administrative limbo, unanswered and unacknowledged. Containment had shifted to isolation. They were cutting him out of the system. He understood the message immediately. "You are no longer invisible." Aelyra felt it too, not through data but through her body. The luminous patterns beneath her skin refused to settle, flaring unpredictably despite her careful control. The scars, quiet for years, ached with a dull insistence that had nothing to do with physical damage and everything to do with stress. She dismissed 3 advisors in rapid succession, not because they'd said anything wrong, but because they'd said everything correctly, scripted reassurance, calculated loyalty, perfect reflections of the system she had upheld, and that was now turning on her. When she was finally alone, she made a decision that would have horrified her council. She turned off the crown. The luminous amplification dimmed to its lowest functional state, leaving only the natural glow of her physiology, uneven, imperfect, real. The scars were still hidden, but barely. Anyone trained to look closely would notice the compensations. She didn't care. She routed her movement through a path that bypassed formal corridors entirely, straight to Elias. He was waiting. Not because he'd been summoned, but because he'd learned to anticipate the moment when pressure forced truth into motion. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly as she entered the maintenance chamber. "They're watching everything now." "But I know," Aelyra replied. Her voice lacked its usual resonance. Stripped of amplification, it sounded lower, more intimate. Elias turned and froze. For the first time, he saw her without the sovereign filter fully engaged. The light was softer, uneven. The faint fractures beneath her skin were visible now, not exposed but no longer concealed by perfection. She looked tired, real in a way no one else was allowed to see. "You turned it off," he said. "Yes." "But that's dangerous." "So is lying to myself," she replied. She stepped closer, not as a queen asserting space, but as a woman reclaiming it. "They will act soon," she said. "Vyerth has enough circumstantial data to justify a forced inquiry. Not public, not yet, quiet." "Memory extraction," Elias said. "Or worse," she confirmed. "They may attempt to provoke instability, push me until the system proves I'm unfit." But Elias clenched his jaw. "Then we don't let them." Aelyra met his gaze. "This is the moment where you step away." "No," Elias said immediately. "You don't understand," she said. "If they fall, they won't fall gently. And if I choose open confrontation, if I admit what I've hidden, everything changes." "I know," Elias replied. "That's why I'm still here." She searched his face as if looking for hesitation. There was none. "You would lose everything," she said quietly. "Your contract, your career, your safety." "Those are things," Elias said. "You're a person." Something broke then, not loudly but completely. Aelyra exhaled, the sound unsteady, and for the first time since Elias had known her, she stopped holding herself upright by force of will alone. Her shoulders sagged just slightly, as if she'd been carrying weight no one else could see. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I was never taught how to lead without pretending I'm unbreakable." Elias stepped closer. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. "You don't have to be unbreakable," he said. "You just have to decide what you're willing to stand for when they try to break you." Her eyes glistened not with tears but with something more dangerous. Resolve. "They will call it weakness," she said. "Then let them," Elias replied. "You'll call it truth." Silence stretched between them, charged and irreversible. Aelyra straightened, not into the rigid posture of a sovereign but into something steadier, grounded, chosen. "If I do this," she said, "there is no return to how things were." Elias nodded. "There never is." She reached out then, not to his sleeve this time, but to his hand. The contact was firm, certain. "Stay with me," she said, not as an order, not as a request, as a truth she was choosing to voice. Elias closed his fingers around hers. "I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, Queen Aelyra decided that the Continuum would learn what it meant to be ruled by someone who had survived, and refused to be ashamed of it. The council chamber had never felt so small. Aelyra stood at its center once more, but this time the architecture failed to do what it had always done, failed to dwarf her, to frame her as an abstraction of power rather than a living being. She had disabled the amplification entirely. No sovereign glow, no ceremonial resonance layered beneath her voice, only the natural luminescence of her physiology, uneven, subtly fractured, unmistakably real. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the tears, not of fear, but of confusion, discomfort, the kind that arose when expectations were violated so thoroughly that no protocol existed to respond. Counselor Vyerth did not hide his satisfaction. "You arrive altered," he said smoothly, "unshielded, unannounced." "I arrive honest," Aelyra replied. Her voice carried without augmentation. It did not need it. "This session was convened to assess irregularities," Vyerth continued. "Your recent conduct, your deviations, have raised legitimate concerns regarding my fitness to rule," Aelyra finished for him. "Yes, I know." The chamber fell silent. She let it. "For 3 years," she said, "this council has governed alongside a fiction, one I helped maintain, one I believed was necessary." Her gaze moved across the tiers, not accusatory, not pleading, measured. 3 years ago there was an attempt on my life. It failed. A sharp intake of breath echoed from somewhere above. "I survived," Aelyra continued, "not without cost, not without injury, and not without learning precisely how little room our system allows for rulers who bleed." Vyerth leaned forward. "You concealed this from us." "Yes," Aelyra said, "because I understood your calculus." A murmur of protest began. She raised a hand. It stopped. "You would not have seen survival," she said. "You would have seen proximity, evidence that I could be touched, that I was not absolute." Her eyes hardened. "So I hid. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was required to be invulnerable in a system that punishes truth." Counselor Saley stood abruptly. "You deceived us." "I protected the continuum," Aelyra replied, "from a collapse driven by perception rather than governance." Vyerth's smile sharpened. "And the human, the maintenance technician, the one who appears repeatedly in restricted sectors." Aelyra did not look away. "He saw what no one else was allowed to see," she said calmly. "Not power, not divinity, consequence." The chamber erupted. Accusations, shock, indignation. Aelyra waited. When silence returned, her voice cut cleanly through it. He did not exploit that knowledge. He did not leverage it. He did not sell it to rivals or whisper it into the ears of those hungry for destabilization. She turned her gaze toward Vyerth. "He did what none of you did." Vyerth stiffened. "And what was that?" "He stayed," Aelyra said. The word landed heavier than any threat. "He recognized survival as strength. He recognized adaptation as intelligence. And he recognized that a ruler forced to pretend she is unbreakable will eventually break in ways far more dangerous than scars." Vyerth's tone sharpened. "You would entrust the legitimacy of your reign to an outsider." "I entrusted my humanity," Aelyra replied. "Something this council demanded I abandon." She stepped forward. "One of you," she said, "authorized biometric investigations without mandate. One of you sought proof not of failure, but of vulnerability, because vulnerability is easier to weaponize than policy." Her gaze locked onto Vyerth. "You were not protecting the continuum," she said. "You were protecting a myth." Vyerth rose. "Then let the council decide whether a queen who lies about her condition deserves to rule." Aelyra did not flinch. "Then let them," she said. She straightened, not into the posture of invulnerability, but into something far rarer. "Integrity. If you believe survival disqualifies me, remove me," she said. "If you believe adaptation is erosion, depose me. But do not pretend that what you fear is weakness." Her voice softened. "You fear truth." Silence followed, not because they agreed, but because, for the first time, the council was being asked to confront itself. The vote was not unanimous. It never was. But when the tally concluded, the outcome was undeniable. Aelyra remained. Vyerth did not. Elias watched the final declaration from a maintenance terminal, heart pounding so hard he barely registered the confirmation chime. She had done it. She had chosen truth, and the continuum had not collapsed. Later, far from the council chamber, in a narrow service corridor no one monitored anymore, Aelyra found him, not as a sovereign, as herself. "It's over," she said quietly. Elias searched her face. "Is it?" "No," she admitted. "But it's changed." She leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. "I named what we are," she said. "Not lovers, not conspirators." "Then what?" Elias asked. She met his gaze. "Witnesses," she said. "To who we choose to be, when the system demands we lie." Elias nodded. I can live with that. Aelyra smiled, not brilliantly, not ceremonially, but honestly. And for the first time since her ascension, the weight she carried felt shared. The station did not celebrate. There were no banners, no announcements, no public declarations of reform. The Continuum had never been a place that acknowledged change loudly. It preferred to let shifts sink in slowly, to normalize them before anyone could decide whether to resist. Aelyra insisted on that. Let them adjust, she had said. Truth doesn't need spectacle to endure. So the days after the council vote passed with an almost eerie normalcy. Trade routes remained stable. Diplomatic envoys continued their carefully rehearsed negotiations. Systems hummed. Lights cycled. Life went on. But beneath the surface, everything had tilted. Elias felt it first in the maintenance network. Requests began routing through him again, but differently now, not as anomalies, as intentional paths. Environmental consultations flagged with priority markers that didn't exist before. Diagnostics attached to governance-level projects. He hadn't been promoted. He'd been positioned. Aelyra noticed the change when she reviewed the new operational matrices. They're adapting, she said quietly, standing beside him in a service corridor that had become, by mutual, unspoken agreement, their place. Not because they understand yet, but because the system survived something it was built to fear. Survival tends to do that, Elias replied. It forces recalibration. She smiled faintly. Her light had changed, not dimmer, not brighter. Truer. The luminous patterns along her skin no longer strained toward uniformity. The compensations were still there, subtle, efficient, but no longer hidden beneath relentless perfection. Anyone trained to observe closely could see the history written into her physiology. No one challenged it, not openly, not yet. You're thinking about leaving, Aelyra said suddenly. Elias looked up from the panel he was adjusting. Was it that obvious? You've been finishing tasks, she said. Closing loops. That's what you do when you expect transition. He exhaled. My contract technically ended last cycle. Everything after that has been flexible. And what do you want? She asked. The question carried no authority, no expectation, just curiosity. I don't know, Elias admitted. Part of me thinks I should disappear before proximity becomes a liability again. Aelyra considered that. That would be logical, she said. Which makes it suspicious, Elias replied. She laughed softly. The sound still startled him sometimes, not because it was rare but because it was unforced. A sound she no longer rationed. You could stay, she said, formally. Elias raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Observing, Aelyra replied. Advising, interrupting flawed logic before it calcifies. That sounds dangerously close to politics. It is, she agreed. Which is why it would not be public. No titles, no declarations. She met his gaze, just access. Elias leaned back against the wall, thinking, and when someone notices, he asked. They will, Aelyra said calmly. Eventually. And then we adapt again. He studied her, the steadiness in her posture, the absence of strain in her glow, the way she occupied space now without bracing against it. You're not afraid of them anymore, he said. Aelyra was quiet for a moment. I am, she admitted, but I'm no longer afraid of myself. That felt like an ending and a beginning. Elias nodded slowly. All right, I'll stay for now. For now, she echoed. They stood there together, listening to the station breathe. I should warn you, Elias added. I'm still going to tell you when something doesn't make sense. I would be disappointed if you didn't, Aelyra replied. A pause, then softer, and Elias. Yes, thank you, she said, for seeing me when it was easier not to. He didn't respond right away. He simply reached out, not dramatically, not possessively, and rested his hand against the cool metal of the wall beside hers. Present, steady. Outside the maintenance corridor, the Continuum continued its careful recalibration. New alliances formed quietly. Old assumptions loosened their grip. Somewhere in the data streams, a future began to take shape. one where strength was no longer defined by the absence of scars. Elias didn't know how long he would remain. Aelyra didn't know how far her changes would reach. But for the first time, neither of them was pretending that uncertainty was failure. And that, Elias suspected, was how